That is to say, its relationship to present and future events as well as past, so that every event becomes something in a network. Now, you will very well understand that when you see the knots in a network, or better, the squares of the net, they're all held together by each other. Imagine the kind of network where instead of there being, something like knitting. In knitting, the stitches are all held together by each other. And if something breaks at one point, the thing starts raveling. So the reticulate view, or the net view of the universe, is one in which the Buddhists say everything mutually interpenetrates everything else. So as I was trying to make the central point, the point of implication, the point of relativity, that things go together like two sticks standing on the ground in this way. You see, they give each other mutual support. Or like the three rings in the Ballantine beer trademark, or the Christian symbol of the Holy Trinity. Those rings interlock. But take one of them away, and the interlocking is broken down for all of them. So in the same way, the individual, although seeming to be something that rattles around in the universe, although a given planet or a given star seems to be something that is moving on its own, the motion, the behavior of stars, is a situation that arises only because of the mutual interdependence of all stars. Because, to take a very simple illustration, if there is only one star in the whole universe, no motion can be ascribed to it. It can't even be said to be still. Nobody knows what it's doing because there's nothing for it to relate to. But take two stars, and they can get nearer to each other or further away from each other. But nobody knows which is moving. Get three stars, and then you have, say, two close together, and one of them seems to go away. Now, who is moving away from who? Are the two stars saying, hey, we don't like you, we're going to get out of your way? Or are they saying to the other star, why don't you like us? Why do you keep going away? Well, who's right? Well, you can say on the principle of democracy that the majority must be right. But then they say, well, let's have an umpire, and we have a fourth star who can stand above us. You see, two stars can only move in a straight line with respect to each other. Three stars can move in a plane with respect to each other, but a fourth star can establish a third dimension, where we can say, I can look down on you and take an objective standpoint. But then the argument is which one of them is the fourth. But that's the basic principle on which the whole universe is constructed. It's a relativity system in which motion depends on comparison with something relatively still. And there can't be any motion at all unless there is that comparison. So, because of this relationship, every individual is so related to everything else that's going on that you imply it. In other words, anybody who was a great scientist from some other world altogether, who studied a human body carefully and figured out the conditions under which such a thing would exist, he would come to the conclusion that that human body was something from a universe just such as we have. He would find that your structure and your behavior implied this whole thing. Just as with a laser beam system, you can photograph a small fragment of any photographic negative, and from that tiny fragment you can reconstruct the whole picture from which it was taken, because the crystalline tensions in that fragment imply the whole context of crystalline tensions that belong to that particular negative. So in exactly the same way, you as an individual imply this world, and this world mutually implies you. And you are a natural formation moving in and with this universe, not determined by it, because this is not a system of determinism. But you are moving with it in just the same harmonious way that you notice the waves moving, and the trees growing, and the clouds moving. And as you don't accuse the clouds of making aesthetic mistakes, so really is a certain light in which you can see human beings, both good and bad, as perfect forms of nature. You may have fashionable discriminations about who is beautiful and who is ugly. You may have metaphysical discriminations about who is sick and who is healthy. You may have moral discriminations about who is good and who is evil. These are all points of view, relative points of view. They're all legitimate because they are parts of the functioning of the whole. The fact that you take those points of view, that too is part of nature. But a skillful person lives on two levels at once. You live basically on the level where you know there are no mistakes. Can't be. Everything moves in accordance with what the Chinese call the Tao, the way of nature. And if you have that basic feeling, you will always be sane. But you are able to comprehend within that feeling a more restricted point of view, whereby things are good and bad. Just as in the confines of this room and this area, it's perfectly clear that there's a difference between the up direction and the down direction. But we know that this area is situated in interstellar space, and there is no up and no down. Now, the second situation doesn't contradict the first. But if you have only the discriminatory point of view, if you take your fundamental stand as a being on the difference between good and evil, you get in the Christian hang-up. You have then to say that there is eternal heaven and eternal hell, that the distinction between good and evil is radical. And if you do that, you begin to suffer from a disease called chronic guilt, which is one of the most destructive emotions that anybody can have. You feel an outcast from the universe, at odds with reality itself, at odds with God. And that sends people quite mad, and is responsible for a good deal of the craziness of Western civilization. It's making too much of a good thing out of the distinction between good and evil. It is an important distinction, but it's not fundamentally important. And you have to learn to admit different degrees of importance. And just say that because you can't just say that because a certain distinction isn't absolute, that it's not important. After all, your own physical formation is not absolute, but it's important. So, the situation of man in this network is to repeat the proposition, on the one hand, that he as an organism, psychophysical organism, is something that the whole cosmos is doing. That was as much of truth, I think, as there is in modern astrology, which I regard as a pseudoscience. But it is based on a very fundamental principle. When you draw a map of a person's soul, you draw a small picture of the universe, a very crude picture. And that is the design of that person's individuality. The truth is, therefore, that your soul is something which contains your body. Your body does not have the soul inside it like a spook. And the whole cosmos is your soul. So the cosmos is doing you at the point you call here and now. Reciprocally, you are doing it. And the one depends upon the other. You have difficulty in conceiving this as a Westerner because we have all been brainwashed by several centuries of put-down theories of man. that you were the wretched little subject, and a disobedient one at that, of an eternal king, and B, that you were just a fortuitous congress of atoms in a mindless mechanism of incredible vastness. Having entertained those two theories of man and of existence for so many centuries, we are very much brainwashed into being unable to see that we and the universe are mutually causative, or to use the Chinese expression, mutually arising. Now then, a second difficulty arises in this, which requires that I bring in some ideas, first of all, from Buckminster Fuller. The principal notion of Buckminster Fuller's thought, and if you don't know this name, Buckminster Fuller is what I would call a philosophical engineer, a man who is one of the most creative minds in the modern world. He invented the geodesic dome, which is his main claim to economic fame. But beyond that, he's done a great deal of extremely fascinating thinking about the future of technology and the situation of man in the universe. And he has devised this important term, synergy, coming from the Greek, syn, with, ergos, work. But what he means by synergy is this, that every complex organism has as a whole an intelligence greater than any one of its parts. This is a difficult idea to swallow, because he applies it to technology in this way. He is saying that the industrial natural complex in which we live is something that is going in a certain direction on its own, whether you like it or not, and that it is able to organize your behavior in a more intelligent way than you can organize it. And he believes, therefore, that the increasing complexity of the industrial complex will of itself, say, outlaw such lunacy as war. It will make it impossible. And that we shall find ourselves increasingly organized by an intelligent system that is not under our conscious direction, but will make us feel, I suppose, rather as our individual selves feel inside our bodies. He gives an illustration. The transportation communications network, aircraft, radio, television, telephone, these taken together are constituting a global net, which might be said to be something like Teilhard de Chardin's idea of the noosphere. I hope you all read Teilhard de Chardin, the famous Jesuit theologian who wrote the best of his books is The Phenomenon of Man. The Earth, which is the geosphere, from the Greek geos, geese, the Earth, then the Earth as a geosphere is covered with a biosphere. That is the sphere of living organisms. The biosphere, in turn, generates the noosphere, which is the communication network that we call the mind, through literature, through speech, through radio and television communication. The noosphere is slowly realized. So Buckminster Fuller is really talking about the same thing. The noosphere is the network of communication set up by technology. And so, for example, let's just take air transportation. As a result of jet planes, all centers that are in communication with each other by jet aircraft are becoming increasingly the same place. When you wake up in Tokyo, having come from Los Angeles or San Francisco, you are slightly in doubt as to where you are, because Tokyo is an immense muddle. It's a mixture of Paris with Los Angeles, of San Francisco with Shanghai, of London vaguely thrown in, and sort of a touch of Japan. It's a phenomenal place. But if you live in San Francisco, you realize it's becoming more like Tokyo. Because we have a tremendous inrush of Japanese culture. We have superb Japanese restaurants. You can go to sushi bars, that is to say bars for rice balls and raw fish, which are beautifully served, just like in a bar in Tokyo. And increasingly, we have supermarkets which sell Oriental, African, and Japanese goods. And I call them supermarkets for the unusual. And more people are laying down tatami mats and cooking over hibachis and using chopsticks and every kind of thing like that. So the point is that how near a place is to you is simply a factor of transportation.